For more on the US President's state visit to Beijing, joining us is Song Zhang. He is the chief correspondent for Shanghai Wen Hui Daily here in Washington. Also with us is Roncevert Almond. He is a partner with the law firm, the Wicks Group, and writes extensively on international affairs. And then there's Dan Ikenson. He's the director of the Stiefel Center for Trade Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. Thanks so much, all of us, for joining us here in the studio. Song, really important visit for both leaders. What about the Chinese side? Xi Jinping's has a pretty important month. What's he getting from this?
I think President Xi takes this state visit of Mr. Trump as a very important opportunity for communications between him and Mr. Trump. And we know they met in Malaga in this April, and also another meeting in the G20 summit.
In Germany,
but, yeah, in Germany. But still, there are many important issues, including DPRK and trade issues for the two leaders to discuss. I think Mr. Xi takes this as a great opportunity to move toward each other and to recalibrate the ongoing U.S.-China relationship.
Ronce, can the relationship be recalibrated? There's been a lot of rhetoric on both sides, especially in the election campaign, which has died down. But there is pressure here in Washington for the U.S. to deliver on this trip with China, but also pressure from the other side for Xi Jinping, who basically has staked out where he wants China to go, and they don't always see eye to eye.
Absolutely. I think the stakes are high for Mr. Trump and for Beijing as well in terms of the state visit here, because it's the first time that, certainly for Mr. Trump in Asia and in China proper, to establish a new relationship under his administration with the United States in terms of bilateral relationships. So we've seen, of course, that there's a dialogue in terms of, well, we're going to have a free and open Indo-Pacific region. We don't know exactly the terms and conditions of that.
That's what Rex Tillerson said about a week before the trip. Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
And Mr. President Trump has kind of he's reiterated that, but he hasn't actually defined what that's going to be. And of course, we have to square that with what we knew from his campaign in terms of America First. And so, how do we square American diplomacy writ large versus the American interest, the national interest, and how is that going to be defined? It'll be interesting to see how that's rolled out.
Yeah, before I go to Dan, I want to follow up on that because, for a lot of people, the Trump administration's policy towards China has seemed a little ad hoc in the first year or so. But then Rex Tillerson, about a week or 10 days before the trip, talked of this Indo-Pacific policy, and the Indo probably means India, not Indonesia. And there's been talk of the democracies of East Asia, which looks like a containment strategy, a bit like a pivot, but with countries instead of policy. China's well aware of that, whereas Xi Jinping has talked about a new model of great power relationships to avoid a clash that we've seen historically in the past between rising powers. So these views aren't exactly the same, are they?
No, and I think that it'll be interesting to see how Mr. Trump balances the reality of the fact that China and the United States are really the two greatest powers in the world, and China being a rising power and the United States being the dominant power, but also recognizing that the United States has treaty allies throughout the Asia-Pacific region and has to take on new rising powers like India as well. And there's a normative aspect, as you mentioned, the democracy and the tradition in U.S. policy about recognizing and working with other democracies. So can he develop a simultaneous track, in other words, recognizing and working with China, rising China, but also maintaining that leadership in the Asia-Pacific region with his treaty allies?
And it's interesting because it's just Trump is bilateral normally and transactional rather than multilateral. So we'll see where that goes down. I'll bring you on the trade front. We're going to get billions of dollars of deals announced in the next 24 hours, and a lot of jobs are going to be created here in the United States. But fundamentally, it doesn't move the differences between the two when it comes to the economic relationship. Is that what both leaders are sort of happy with, sort of patch up and create some goodwill, but kick the can down the road for the difficult questions?
I think it suits Trump particularly well. He sees trade and trade agreements not as a set of rules, but as a contract, like a business negotiation, like a real estate deal. And when he likes to deal on a one-on-one basis with others, and if they can put deliverables like this on the table, that makes him feel good and accomplished about it. And it's nothing to sneeze at. I've heard talk of $250 billion worth of deals possibly
potentially, yeah.
potentially down the pike this week. But that does not get to the central problems that we're having with China, the United States and China, and that is adherence to the rules of trade. There's accusations of forced technology transfer and intellectual property theft. There is this burgeoning high-tech trade war, I think, that's been brewing for over a decade, and something's going to have to be done about that. What President Xi will have over President Trump is a little bit of leverage. If he promises all these purchases, the U.S. is in the process of conducting a Section 301 investigation.
Which is a boring speak for what?
It's investigations into Chinese unfair practices, forced technology.
Right.
We're also considering changes to our foreign investment rules. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States reviews potential acquisitions of U.S. companies.
Yes, there's already been a semiconductor deal blocked, right?
There has. Fairly recently, there have been several. Not necessarily blocked, but the signals were sent that the deal shouldn't go through. But these kinds of things are going to agitate the Chinese government, and there's going to be an effort, I think, to deter Trump from following through on some of the retaliation, on some of the measures, by saying, hey, we're not going to buy these Boeing jets, we're not going to buy this oil. So we need to focus on securing the infrastructure of the relationship and making sure that the United States and China both adhere to the obligations, the commitments they undertook in the WTO.
DPRK, the elephant in the room, or perhaps it's not the elephant, everyone's talking about it. Let's play Donald Trump in front of the National Assembly of the Republic of Korea, and then I'll get your reaction to that.
The world cannot tolerate the menace of a rogue regime that threatens with nuclear devastation. All responsible nations must join forces to isolate the brutal regime of North Korea, to deny it, and any form of it, you cannot support, you cannot supply, you cannot accept. We call on every nation, including China and Russia, to fully implement UN Security Council resolutions, downgrade diplomatic relations with the regime, and sever all ties of trade and technology.
Now, there was a few after that speech because Trump, especially here in Washington, because Donald Trump, the US president, did not repeat the language he used at the UN General Assembly. Rocket Man, ruined Elton John for all of us forever. Rocket Man on a suicide mission. But for those people who watch this, there's a slight contradiction in this statement because at the one time he's basically saying, isolate DPRK, we can't do any business with it, and then appealing on China and Russia to uphold UN sanctions resolution, which of course only goes so far because that's what the international community have agreed on. Those sanctions are being implemented. But at the beginning he calls for almost a complete break-off of ties, but then UN resolutions. This won't be lost on Beijing, right? I mean, is he asking for too much here?
I think that's all right, and that is also within the expectation of Beijing. And I think his speech in South Korea is more moderate, as you said, than his speech in UN General Assembly in September. And I think China will be ready to negotiate with Mr. Trump, especially on 3 or 4 major issues. As I heard, the U.S. is demanding the cut of oil completely from Beijing to Pyongyang, and second is the financial inflow to DPRK from China will have to be cut, and also laborers and DPRK laborers should not be allowed to work in China anymore. This kind of demands, I think, will be the main issues being discussed. But I think, yeah.
That's an embargo, not sanctions. I mean, everyone knows what happened with the last oil embargo imposed on a nation state in Asia. I think it was 1941.